Let's make damn sure they hear us when we demand that they do their jobs. Protect this country. Protect the people you swore to serve.
I demand accountability.
Disgraceful. So-called leaders of this country downplay or deny the reality of that day pisses me the off.
I got my first death threat related to January 6th while I was testifying before the select committee hearing, telling the truth about what I experienced on January 6th.
We've got ICE and CBP tearing families apart in the middle of the night. We've got parents who are afraid to send their kids to school. And politicians, they keep acting like they've got all the time in the world.
This really is why I'm here to talk to you guys today. We are the stewards of our democracy.
You need to kill me so bad.
Come here.
All right, welcome to another edition of the Michael Fanone Show. I'm your host, Michael Fanone. We got my brother here, Peter.
How's it going, y'all? Yep. Yeah, here we are. We've got this set weekly, 3 or 3:30 on Thursdays. So great to have y'all here. And yeah, we've got two guests today. But Mike, I don't know if you have any announcements or things on your mind before we get right into it.
No, man, we got an action-packed episode here. Like you said, two guests. So let's just jump into it. Give them as much of the hour as we can. My first guest today is Ben Freedland. Ben's the host of the Human Intelligence Ledger on LinkedIn and Substack, where he interviews former federal agents and analysts about how policing and intelligence actually works behind the scenes. He's a former drug dealer who, from a federal prison cell in Florida, provided information to the FBI that helped take down Anton Lazario, who's a Minnesota Republican operative who's now serving 21 years for trafficking teenage girls. Ben is a fierce advocate for law enforcement reform and accountability as a consultant and influencer, and he's exactly the kind of voice this show was built for. So, Ben, without further ado, welcome to the show, buddy.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Michael. I'm very humbled and I'm very honored to be on the show with you. First of all, let me start off by saying thank you for your service. You're a hero, and I have a lot of respect for you, and I have a lot of disrespect for the people that disrespect you. I don't know how more simply to put that. I made an announcement this morning to the public that I was coming on this show in a law enforcement forum, and it was horrific, and I don't know how to process it. In any case, thank you for having me. I really look forward to this conversation, and I just wanted to get that out of the way first.
No, I appreciate it. It means a lot. It's unfortunate that more people in the law enforcement community aren't capable of a little introspect and nuance and recognizing nuance in the law enforcement community. But again, I know what I experienced on January 6th, and I really don't give a fuck what their opinions are as to those experiences. But you've got a really interesting origin story. I'd like you to talk a little bit about one, how you came to be incarcerated in Florida, and then providing information to law enforcement that led to the capture and then the conviction of this child sex trafficker, and your work going forward with criminal justice reform, which I'm sure is an issue that's near and dear to my heart as well.
And that's why we're on the show together. I grew up in Beverly Hills. I was born and raised in Southern California. I was a very privileged white Jewish boy from that area of the world, and I had a very privileged upbringing. Fast forward, I went to San Francisco State University. I graduated. I fell right into the Great Recession of 2008 and 9, and I didn't have a lot of options, nor did a lot of other people that were freshly graduated from college. And to make a long story short, I ended up in the world of drug trafficking. I was a music festival food vendor. I was selling coconut cocktails at large music festivals across the country. And when the music festival season was over, I had a lot of cash and I had a lot of contacts in the music festival world. And I decided that I would help them out, however stupid that was. And I started trafficking marijuana from California to Pennsylvania on a small scale. And then it got out of control. I was doing large loads across the country. I was an interstate drug trafficker, and I loved it. It was a lot of fun. I have to be the first one to admit that it was a rush. There was, adrenaline pumping through my veins, and it was an incredible experience. However stupid it was, which it was. I was involved in a armed robbery. I was the victim. And that was several years into my drug trafficking career. And that is where I stopped. I said, what the hell am I doing here? This is stupid. And I began cooperating with law enforcement after that happened. After I looked down the barrel of the gun, I was like, all right, I'm done. I'm retiring. And I started cooperating. I'm doing this in a very condensed manner, but I started cooperating. I found out that I had exposure in a federal investigation. I was a cooperating witness for that case out of the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. Was working together with the United States Postal Inspector Service and the FBI to help them with information. And when they were done using me, which was a course of over 2 years, I continued on in my work as an informant for the federal government in a professional capacity with the ATF and other agencies across the country. And I was helping develop leads in ways that in other law enforcement and informant elements could not. In a professional capacity, I was paid as a contractor. And I did that for about a year and a half before I self-surrendered to custody, where I did 84 months. I did 77 on 84. I spent 31 months in solitary. Before I even went in, because I was such a prolific informant and I was effective and reliable, I actually had contact with the special investigative agent inside of the prison before I even went to prison. And they connected me while I was in there to do work, which is what I did as well. And during that time, I became a protected government witness. You can Google that. I can't talk about it, but I was incarcerated in a undisclosed government location. And I was participatory in that program for 2.5 years before I left, and did the remainder of my time incarcerated at General Population Yards. I left prison, I got out, and I drove trucks and started a company, but I decided that I wanted to use my experience as a professional informant to teach law enforcement how to be more effective when cultivating confidential sources in order to improve their human intelligence capacity. And I've been doing that now for the last year, but I also started a publication interviewing law enforcement at the highest levels, from the administration of the DEA to CIA operations officers, and also former cooperators, so that we can get an idea of how to effectively communicate with each other from the perspective of the criminal for the handlers in the field, and so that we can have the most effective type of communication, so that we can get the bigger cases and we can be well effectively. Yes, I also helped take down Anton Lazara. That was a huge case. I was very proud of that. And I did that from a jail cell in Mariana, Florida. I spent a lot of my time at that prison, but I was also incarcerated in New York, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Oklahoma. And my last stop was in Florida, and I was able to pass along information to investigators and journalists to help break the story on this fucking pervert. And I took him down. I helped substantially. I mean, the investigators and the FBI and the prosecution played a big role, but I also had a role, and I'm very proud of that role. So that's me in a nutshell. It's a lot to take in, and there's probably a lot more I didn't cover, but this is my new line of work, and I take it very seriously, and I've been very successful.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because that's what I did as a police officer pretty much the entirety of my career. I spent a very, very brief amount of time as a DC cop in uniform, in patrol, and, learned pretty early on that was not for me. And so I ended up in units, special mission units, focused primarily on narcotics trafficking and violent crime. And big part of what I did was working human intelligence, working with sources. And I learned early on in my career that, a narcotics officer is only as good as his sources. And I'm curious what your experience was across the board, like with different, I'm assuming you didn't just work with federal agencies, you worked with state and local law enforcement. Did you have any opportunity to, and what the experience was there? Because my mentors always told me that, to get the most out of your informants, it really is, it's about establishing trust. And that turned into, for me, oftentimes a real lasting friendship.
Bingo.
One of my informants, my longest informant, was Leslie Perkins. I say her name because she has since passed away. But we had a professional relationship for about a year and a half before we developed a real friendship, and that was born out of partnering up and actually doing drug buys together, and recognizing the fact that oftentimes my life was in her hands and her life was in my hands. And for me to make that work mentally, it couldn't work any other way than if there was a friendship. And then, I saw the way that other agents, other officers treated their informants like they were garbage. And, for me, it was like, this is a human being, regardless of the circumstances that brought them to working with me, whether it was a monetized situation, like you said, a professional informant, or whether it was somebody that was working off a criminal charge. It didn't matter. It's a human being. They're risking their lives. And so that to me was, I think probably 85% of the informants that I worked with ended up becoming close personal friends of mine.
You brought up so many points that I talk about routinely with law enforcement. I don't know where to start. So one thing that I'll say is the thing that most fascinates me about your career is not the sensational part of the end, but for me personally, is the time that you spent working with informants and narcotics, because that's sort of my beat. That's who I talk to, and that's who I work with. And so in that respect, we have a lot in common. And there are a lot of things that you pointed out there that are totally true. One of the things that I'm going to talk about first is the fact that, yes, the relationship between an informant and their handler is very personal. You're not just a handler and an informant. You're a daddy. You're the Pope. You're the everything. You're all into one. It's a very unique, special relationship, and it would be very difficult if you were not genuine for you not to have a friendship. Now, I understand that there needs to be professional boundaries, but I still talk to my original handler. I talked to him 2 days ago for an hour, and I talk to him all the time, and he's my friend, and he's my actual friend, and we'll talk to each other until the day I die, because the relationship that I have with him is extremely close, and that is a very important element of how that you build rapport and respect. You cannot just dismiss someone and throw them to the wolves and tell them to go fuck themselves. First of all, they're not going to work with you 9 times out of 10 if they see that you're fucking around with them. That's a really, really important element, is to treat someone with respect. And you can't do that by being disingenuous. And so there are a lot of handlers that treat their informants like shit. And that's, it's part of the gig, I guess, but it's not really a way to effectively solicit information and gather intelligence. There are different types of informants. There's the informant that you pick up and they got a dime bag and they're going to give you 3 cases, and after those 3 cases, their case might get dismissed. There are reliable informants, and there are, of course, professional informants like myself. And then, of course, there's me, who's teaching handlers now, and 15 years later, how to be more effective. Yes, 85% of the officers don't really understand the intricacies of how to work together with a confidential source. But once they do, and once they understand, and if they're listening now and they maybe hear something that I might say that can help, it's great. But there's not a lot of people that work in law enforcement that can actually do what you did. And if you can't do it, step out of the way, because you might jeopardize something that is very, very important, and you can do that very quickly.
Well, I want to talk about, first of all, from my perspective, like my lived experience over 2 decades with the Metropolitan Police Department. I didn't like my initial going into, narcotics and working that as a focus. Like, I thought drug dealers were the scum of the earth. I thought they were the lowest of the low. And I had no compassion and no empathy for drug traffickers. And that was really just born out of, I was a white kid from the suburbs. I had absolutely no experience with drugs, not even marijuana growing up. I've never used drugs my entire life. And so I didn't have any insight into the lived experience of, what would bring somebody to sell drugs. I just thought that all of them were, what you see in Hollywood, which is like this, kingpin type that is selling drugs, polluting their community. They're violent, they're vicious. And in working with people like yourself, I learned that that was not the case, that the vast majority of people that I came in contact with were just simply people that were trying to earn a buck. We're trying to make it in, make it in America. And they weren't violent, and they weren't using violence in furtherance of their drug dealing. They just wanted to earn a living and feed their family, and they didn't have any other opportunities or see any other path to make that happen. And so it brought me in touch with the human side of criminality. And I think that that's what made me a better police officer. And that's why I always, like, even in the last half or the last fraction of my career, always encouraged younger officers, all officers, to develop informants, whether they were a patrol officer or not, because it's going to give them insight into the community that they won't get. Whether you're wearing a uniform or not, you're wearing a badge. And you're just not going to be privy to, essentially what it's like on the street.
Well, of course, I agree with essentially everything you're saying. There is a victim of circumstance. A lot of the people, especially, I know that you were in a very interesting area. Washington, D.C., for those of you that don't know, has some very shitty neighborhoods, and they're very dangerous. Like, fuck. I remember one time I got out at Union Station and I started walking. I don't remember which direction I was walking, but I was like lost on my phone, and I was walking. Maybe I was like 10 minutes away from Union Station, and the next thing I know, this officer rolls up to me and he's like, "What the fuck are you doing here? You need to get out of here. This is a really bad neighborhood. Someone's going to rob you." I was like, all right, anyway.
So that was my old stomping ground. And I'm going to go out on a limb and just say that you probably made your way north from Union Station towards New York Avenue. And you were in the Circumcorda neighborhood in Northwest Washington, D.C., which was a notorious open-air drug market.
All right.
It was extraordinarily violent, and it was a stone's throw from the United States Capitol.
Yeah.
D.C. is most certainly not all, federal buildings and the National Mall. It's got a lot of public housing projects. and it certainly still has its tough neighborhoods.
Absolutely. When I think of the tough neighborhoods of the United States, I think, at least on the East Coast, you've got like, Newark, New York City, Camden, Baltimore, and DC. It's a different kind of tough. It's really, and a lot of people don't even recognize that when thinking of Washington, DC. I spent a lot of my time in Georgetown when I go to Washington, DC. So it's like completely different than that area. And when I was face down in that phone and that cop came up to me, I mean, he had empathy. He was like, "Man, you got to get out of here. This is not where you need to be." He could read me, and he knew I wasn't where I needed to be. I want to also say, back to what you were originally saying, is that there is something to be learned about criminality. I grew up privileged, but a lot of the people that ended up in prison around me and that were affiliated with me in drug trafficking grew up way differently than you or I did. They grew up in those housing projects on New York Avenue or whatever it was, and that's all they knew. And that's not their fault necessarily. It's just the way they grew up. They didn't have fathers. They had, they were totally impoverished, and they started selling drugs early before they were probably 10 years old. They were doing lookouts. They were, hiding weapons, and they graduated. There's a whole dichotomy of how the hood works. And a lot of those people that were selling drugs in the area that you did your beat had that upbringing, unfortunately. That's a different problem altogether. But once you can understand that they are bad people. They're doing bad things, but it's a victim of circumstance. If you can understand that, then you might be able to crack an informant a little bit more effectively. And that's just a fact.
Yeah, no, I mean, now it's bringing a lot back to me. I haven't had discussions about my law enforcement career in quite some time, but that's really how I became disillusioned with law enforcement and disillusioned in my career and disillusioned in, policing, was that, once I started to, understand that the, vast majority of people that I was coming across, the vast majority, as doing street level operations, the vast majority of people that we interacted with and arrested were addicts themselves that were selling drugs to support their habit. And so, for the vast majority of my career, success, and even still to this day, I think law enforcement they view success as statistically driven. It's how many arrests have we made? And that to them is, the more arrests, the more success we're having in combating crime in the community. I don't equate, statistically driven policing as being successful in reducing the crime rate. I think that's absolute and utter fucking bullshit. And I would see it in these operations that we would do. We would go out, and I'm sure you're familiar with the term buy and bust.
Yes.
For the people in the audience that are not familiar with the term, typically a buy and bust operation is something where you have an undercover officer and then you have an arrest team, uniformed officers or officers in tactical vests. And the undercover officer goes out into a community and they buy drugs from street level dealers. And then the arrest team comes in and they arrest the guy almost immediately after the undercover buy takes place. One, I always hated that as a narcotics officer because when you arrest somebody immediately after you buy drugs for them, the first thing that the drug dealer realizes is that the guy that I just sold drugs to is an undercover police officer. And you put that officer at risk because most police departments, mine specifically, we would just repeat that operation over and over and over and over and over again using the same undercover officers in the same neighborhoods. And I saw it oftentimes result in violence against that officer because eventually people realized that guy's a cop. I remember, a nightmare scenario in which we had an undercover officer that had, a gun pulled on him inside of a house that he had gone and made a buy-in because they recognized him as a police officer. And fortunately, he made it out alive, but that could have been a really, really ugly situation. But the other thing was all we ended up doing was arresting guys that were essentially addicts themselves and, charging them with a felony distribution of whatever the drug du jour happened to be that day, and we padded our stats, but didn't really do anything. One, to help somebody who's a drug addict, who is really locked into this cycle of behavior, and two, but by locking up this person who's not engaging in violence to further their, I mean, obviously, yes, we want to take drug dealers off the streets, but I think that there were better uses of our resources, and that's really what pitted me up against upper management throughout my career, was the fact that I felt like we were just looking for low-hanging fruit rather than going after and investing the time and effort and resources in pursuing, quote unquote, real criminals.
I saw that personally, what you experienced, in a different way. In Washington, D.C., for the audience that doesn't know, every case is a federal case. And so every case that you arrested for, the individuals would end up, correct me if I'm wrong, in federal custody, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would see, 10% of each federal prison. There's like 140 federal prisons across the country. I would say at least 10 to 15% of each prison has a DC inmate population. And for the most part, they were all low-lying fruit. And they were all people who were very low on the totem pole. And there was not a lot of leadership or large scale criminals from DC. They had their own group of people. So I got to know that particular type of person pretty well, specifically from their geographic locale where they're from. And it's very unfortunate hearing that's why it ended up being like that in prison. Me seeing all of these people who weren't necessarily the big dogs in the area ending up in federal prison because they were arrested in DC for having 5 grams of crack cocaine. There is a really serious issue with the people from DC in federal prison. It's a known thing that they are they're a different breed of cat. I'm going to leave it at that. It's just not. It's a different type of criminal. I don't want.
I also want to address the fact that we had, like, early on in my career, there were people, the threshold for mandatory minimums and the threshold for doing federal time for drug dealing and drug trafficking was incredibly low. And then there was this shift under the Obama administration, and the pendulum swung so far the other way that rather than engaging in like a thoughtful, transparent, productive conversation about over criminalizing behavior or under criminalizing behavior, rather than finding that sweet spot, we always just seem to in law enforcement, the pendulum swings so far to one side or the next, and we never seem to be able or be capable of of producing a result that finds that sweet spot that ensures public safety, but also doesn't load our prison population up with people that would be better served with drug counseling or any other host of resources that are or should be made available to them.
There is a huge mental health crisis in our country, and it starts in our jails and prisons. I have spent a lot of time in jails and prisons, and it's at least 50% of the people in there have serious mental health issues, and some of them are very severe, and they have no place being incarcerated. That's a serious issue, and maybe a topic for another day. But it's a reality that we're and there are departments now that are really using mental health resources and going off and doing calls with officers to de-escalate, and that's a step in the right direction. And but I hear what you're saying, And it's good to hear that coming from someone like yourself. And I appreciate that. Before I forget about this, I mentioned this earlier in the podcast. I have created a platform now that is, I'm in the top 1% of all content influencers on the LinkedIn platform. I'm in the top probably 0.05% for law enforcement. And I've built this over the last year, and I have, thousands of followers in law enforcement at all the senior levels. And I have probably 2 million views a month now on all my social media platforms, which might be small potatoes compared to you, but I'm bringing this up because I want to talk about it. It's weighing on me. I have a lot of exposure in law enforcement, and a lot of people take me very seriously in this field. And I told you earlier, I posted this thing about you, and I was very excited to be on this show. And I was very, very enthusiastic about this conversation. But what hit me today when I posted it was terrifying. It was disgusting, and I want to address it. Everyone, use the thumbs down emoji and the angry face emoji and just propouted all of these horrifically disgusting and vile misinformation about you and what you did. And I don't know how to process it, my friend. How do I process that? Work through that with me.
I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I got to be honest with you. Like I have a difficult time trying to figure it out myself. So much so that I've just stopped.
Okay, maybe that's it.
There's a lot of conspiracy theories that circulate about January 6th itself, which is the date that I've become known for, despite having a literal 20-year career in law enforcement that had absolutely nothing to do with January 6th or my participation in defending the Capitol that day. I don't understand why, law enforcement officers aren't able to see what I did and recognize it as I used what happened to me, which was something that was ugly and brutal and horrific. I used that experience to try to draw attention to the fact that in a time in which police officers were being criticized pretty much for everything and demonized, that there are police officers that did the right thing. There are police officers that, regardless of their political ideology, because, in that tunnel that I was defending alongside of 40 or 50 officers, there were a lot of Trump supporters that were there. But they still recognized that, despite their politics, that their oath to the Constitution was bigger than Donald Trump or the MAGA movement. And they went and they did their jobs. And some of them continue to support Donald Trump. But they did their job that day, and why, but I'll tell you, dude, law enforcement is not this unified entity that people think it is. The thin blue wall of silence is designed to protect officers who adhere to the thin blue wall of silence. People that go outside of that and, shine light on law enforcement, especially when, I've continued on and I talk about other issues besides just, January 6th or even political issues. And they don't like that. But I would like to take this opportunity to address them. Go fuck yourselves. Each and every fuck you, fuck your career. You're a disgrace to the badge. And that's how I feel.
I'm laughing, but I'm like with you, bro. That is the most real thing. I am disgusted. I think you helped me resolve this in my head. Just ignore it. There's no reason to take any stock in these people. They're afraid of the truth. You are the truth. You did what you did that day, and that doesn't define you. The 20 years before that does, or just what you're doing now, or your life now. That's what defines you. These people are so narrow-minded, and they think that you're, the devil. They're so afraid of you because they're afraid of the truth. And this is not just like one or two comments, man. I'm talking about like 500 comments of just the most vicious, ridiculous shit, and I'm going to ignore it. I don't care about them. I care about the truth. And the truth is that we all on this show that are listening to you have a tremendous amount of respect for you. And getting back to what it is that I do now and relating to that is that if for the law enforcement that are listening to this show is that you have to have respect when individuals are talking to one another, especially harping back to the days while you were in narcotics. If there's no respect, you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to build cases that are larger than the street corner guys. And you have to be able to do that. And there's different types of respect in every different aspect of society. But criminal respect is much different than opening the door for an old lady. There's sometimes that's all you've got when you're a criminal. That's all you got when you're sitting in a jail cell is respect. You don't have anything else. And it's a very, very important facet of life and in society. But it's very, very important that you remember that for anyone that's in law enforcement now. The conversation that you and I are having right now is with the kind of conversation that we need to have if we're sitting across from one another and you've got a badge on and I'm shitting bricks trying to figure out what it is that I'm going to do to get out of this life.
Right. I couldn't agree with you. And I appreciate you, sticking up for me, buddy. Thank you. That was
I always will, man. When I see something that's right, I'm gonna stand by it. And I don't care that you were in law enforcement and that I was a criminal or anything. It's just what's right, man. I'm just terrified and horrified and disgusted all at once because I see this as a much larger issue than just someone or some people talking shit. This is a bigger issue.
I'll let you in on a little secret before we jump. Before my life as a law enforcement officer, most of my friends were criminals. And the only people that have stuck by me through this entire experience and even, came out on the other end after I left law enforcement were the criminals. And so I feel much closer to my criminal friends than I'd ever have with the law enforcement community. And it's unfortunate. It's made it so much that I regret the 20 years that I spent as a police officer. This is the first time that I've ever said that publicly, but I regret the time that I spent wearing a badge. The only thing that gives me solace is that I'm able to take that experience and use it to draw attention to and shine a light on things that need to change in policing in this country and in law enforcement, to really make it about public safety and to make it about serving the community. And I think that was something that never was even brought up in my entire career, that your job is to serve the community and that you are a public safety officer, that your job is in service of others. The only thing that, we were always just it was us against them. That was
that is the wrong mentality, my friend. And don't be ashamed. I don't think that it's wrong that you have that feeling, but you wouldn't be able to be in the position that you're in right now unless you had those 20 years. And so you have to take that with stride. And I can sense something. But first of all, my due diligence on your background is that we also have a couple of things of similarity. One is, I'm just going to take a guess here. You probably have some kind of PTSD. Just wild guess.
My PTSD has PTSD. But yeah, no, there's that's a great, we're definitely gonna have to continue this conversation
for sure.
Probably many, many, many times over, but
we can do that. I think we also have I have a traumatic brain injury, which is recent, which is sort of like helping my PTSD because I'm forgetting things. But
that's a good way to look at it. It's not as well. So
there's we speak about these things with jest, but they're very serious. And when I hear you say something like, I regret the badge, you just gotta, I feel the PTSD coming out, and I deal with it every day, and it's very severe, and it sucks. And but we just have to remember that our experiences have created a mission for one another. You have a mission now because of what you did, and so do I. And I think it's really that's really important, man. And I don't know how much I've gone off on a tangent here, but I really wanted to say that.
No, thank you, and that's definitely something that that we'll talk about in future discussions. But Ben, thank you so much for for coming on. We will continue this another time.
Absolutely, I look forward to staying in touch with you, man, and keep up the good work. Keep on fighting.
Likewise, thanks, buddy.
All right, you have a good one.
Here. All right. Well, before we bring Jordan, our next guest, on, I want to take a second to give a shout out to our sponsor, Ground News, because partnerships like this are what are part of what helps us keep doing independent conversations like these without corporate gatekeepers deciding what gets talked about and what doesn't. In this stream, it's a perfect example of why I use it. You've got conversations about media narratives, power structures, accountability, and political candidates. And depending on where you are or where you get your news, you can walk away with completely different versions of reality. That's why I use Ground News. Ground News is an app and a website that lets you compare how outlets across the political spectrum are covering the same story. You can compare headlines side by side. You can see political bias at the publication level and use features like blind spot feed to spot stories one side of the media barely covers while the other side pushes heavily. Especially right now with elections ramping up and narratives getting shaped in real time, it's one of the best tools out there if you actually want the full picture instead of just somebody else's version of it. So go to groundnews.com/MFS and get 40% off the Vantage plan. All right, let's keep the conversation going. My next guest is Jordan Korgood, and she's running for one of the most powerful offices in America that you've probably never heard of. The Massachusetts Governor's Council is the body that confirms every judge, every parole board member, and every pardon in the state. It's been around since 1629, and the seat Jordan is running for has been held by the same guy since 1993. Jordan wants to change what the job actually does, and she's been endorsed by Run for Something, and she's here to make the case as a proud trans woman who wants to make the state of Massachusetts a more fair and just place to live. So Jordan, welcome.
Hi, Michael. So good to be speaking with you today.
Likewise. Thank you for taking the time to come on.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
So tell me about your story. How did you even hear about the Governor's Council, and why did you pick this as your entry to politics?
Absolutely. So I was very active at my school, at my university, a couple of years ago with student activism, protesting, largely in terms of environmental protesting. When I first started, I got my master's degree in environmental policy. So that makes up a big bulk of the background that I have in political stuff to begin with. But I started, I was very active with my school's Hillel when I first got to college, because I grew up in a very conservative, Jewish, pro-Israel household in a very pro-Israel neighborhood. And I ended up going on birthright, going to Israel when I was 18 years old in 2019. And I got to see the reality of what Israel looks like for both Palestinian people and Jewish folks there on the ground. And I was really frustrated that a lot of information had been withheld from me during my upbringing. So I started becoming involved with progressive Jewish organizing, protesting against what the Israeli government was doing post October 7th. I lost a friend who was serving in the IDF during October 7th. So I had a lot of these really conflicted feelings about what was going on, because I was heartbroken to see what had happened to my friend, what had happened to scores of other Jewish folks during October 7th. But I was also so disgusted to see the violence that was being kind of brought onto the Palestinian people by the Israeli government and by the IDF after October 7th. So I became involved with a lot of organizing work on campus and ended up being at my school's encampment in 2024, and was eventually arrested alongside 100 of my peers, including 20 other progressive, anti-war, anti-genocide Jews. And we were carted off to the Nashua Street, Suffolk County jail. We were processed, and I went through the judicial process for the charges that they tried to get us on, which were rioting and trespassing. Mind you, this was a school that I was paying $50,000 a year to attend to, that I was being brought up on charges for trespassing, for sitting on my school's common. So all of the charges were eventually dropped pre-arraignment. They were never filed, but I got an inside look at the judicial system in Massachusetts and found that there was a ridiculous amount of bureaucracy and a ridiculous amount of autonomy for a select few people in terms of holding power above those being brought up on charges. And I started asking questions about who makes these decisions, who holds power in the judicial system in Massachusetts. I found out that we are one of the few states in the entire country where not a single judge is elected directly by citizens. I found out that we have this body called the Governor's Council, responsible for appointing every single judge in the state, and that theoretically they are supposed to use their post to scrutinize, investigate, question each nominee before appointing judges. The problem is they don't do it. They rubber stamp candidates through. They receive a $36,000 a year check to show up to one meeting a week where they hardly actually end up questioning or criticizing any of the nominees that come through, which is why 98% of nominees that have been brought before the council in the last 40 years have been approved by my opponent and the 41-year incumbent. He doesn't take the job seriously. He doesn't care about who makes it to the bench. And worst of all, he has no vested interest in using his post to shape Massachusetts' judicial system to be a more equitable and more fair one for all. I was frustrated, upset, and angry that this is the person allegedly representing me and my interests at the State House. And I figured, what better way to do something about it than to run against him?
That's amazing. I think it's poignant because at a time where I think a lot of Americans are waking up to the level of power that's wielded by the judiciary, by judges, that we the people need to exert as much control and provide a check to, one of the elements of our democracy that has very few checks and balances. It's
Absolutely.
very difficult. It's very difficult to get a judge removed. And so we make sure that judges that we appoint are people who are, one, they're beholden to the Constitution and to the rule of law, but two, that they possess compassion and empathy.
Exactly.
I've always said, the law enforcement, the criminal justice system, there is a time and place for compassion and empathy. And it's at sentencing. That is the time in which judges are supposed to take into account the entirety of, the defendant's life, all the things that brought that person to, this moment in which they are before a judge preparing to be sentenced. And I think that's incredibly important. And I'm curious how your lived experience has shaped your politics.
Absolutely. So, I think my identity is a part of me, and it's something that I can't ignore. I'm transgender, and what I've witnessed in the last year is Donald Trump using his fascist federal regime against marginalized folks from all different backgrounds. He's using packed courts and bigoted judges to attack racial equity, anti-recidivism, rehabilitation, labor rights, trans rights, immigrant rights, reproductive rights, First Amendment protections for protesters and activists, any single issue that affects groups from a marginalized background, he's using the courts against folks like myself, undocumented folks who are seeking reproductive care, which is why I want to make sure that our judges in Massachusetts are actually reflecting the values that the voters of Massachusetts care about. Because this is the closest thing that we have to general democratic control over the composition of the judiciary. I want to make sure our judges are committed to racial equity in the courts. I want to make sure that they're committed to anti-recidivism and rehabilitation being emphasized. Our judges should be backing working class folks, people who are seeking abortions or reproductive care. Our judges should be using their full judicial authority to protect and kind of safeguard protections in Massachusetts for trans folks like myself to be able to access proper identification, to be able to get our proper documentation, and to ensure that we can access gender affirming care. I take this medication every single week. This is estradiol valerate. I've been on it for 3 years as of this week. And without that medication, I don't think that I would be alive talking to you right now. I was incredibly depressed for a long, long time, and living my truth and being able to access gender affirming care, being able to access the medication that's being ripped away from people via the courts across the country is incredibly, incredibly critical to the livelihood and well-being of folks like myself. So I want to make sure that our judges are willing to back that and use their power to protect folks like me.
Yeah, and I, like, not to deviate from, from your political ambitions, but so I was talking with my last guest about how, my career in law enforcement, lack of familiarity with the communities that I was policing, and one of my longtime informants turned closest friend, probably of my entire life, was a transgendered woman, Leslie Perkins. Mm. And I never thought that I would be in the space in which I am a trans rights activist. But Leslie was the one that made me recognize the fact that she's a human being just like everybody else. And there's, and I don't know, it fucking infuriates me to watch vulnerable communities in this country be attacked by the administration, whether it's communities of color, whether it's the trans community. And I mean, I would argue that although, recent events would probably put trans community and the Black and brown community neck and neck for being attacked by the Trump administration. But it is more important now than ever for people like myself who are not under attack by this administration because of how I look or how I talk, to stand up for all the other communities that are being, I mean, literally, I don't know, like what is it like? Yeah, explain to people, what is it like to live under a government that denies your existence? What the fuck does that feel like?
It's infuriating, to say the least. I could use much stronger language, but I won't. I mean, I'll say it. It's fucking horrific to see what's going on and what's being done to trans folks across the country. 3 days ago, a young trans woman, a 19-year-old student at the University of Washington, was stabbed to death. The suspect was allegedly brought in today. They found him. But we are witnessing what most experts are recognizing as the first stages of a genocide against trans people in the US. In Kansas, trans folks are legally not allowed to drive vehicles anymore. And in a place like Kansas, public transit is not getting you around. Public transit is not going to get you to your job or to the doctor, which means that if you can't drive a vehicle and you can't possess a driver's license, which trans folks cannot in Kansas anymore, you are effectively being legislated out of existence. That is what the biggest thing that we are seeing happen to trans people across the country. In places like Tennessee, in places like Florida and Texas, we're seeing trans folks lose their ability to use the bathroom. We're seeing trans folks lose their ability to access gender-affirming care. Federally, I can't get a passport with the correct documentation on it anymore. I filed to get a passport a couple of weeks before Trump took office with the correct gender marker, and it was rejected, which means that traveling now takes me an additional 45 minutes consistently when I go to the airport, because I have a document that has a very, very old picture of me with a male gender marker that does not look accurate. It looks fraudulent to the TSA agents, who are then, if there's any kind of suspicion brought up by a discrepancy between what my gender marker says and what I look like, they then have to go through a very, very thorough pat down, which is humiliating to me. It's something that I've lived through. It's something that I have now dealt with the last 28 times that I have traveled on an airplane. I count every single time, because without fail, I get a full body pat down where they are checking me very thoroughly, all because my gender marker is not correct on my current documentation. I have friends who are in states where you cannot safely necessarily walk down the street as a trans individual. You have to worry about getting mugged or harassed, beaten, or killed. I'm pretty lucky to live in a place like Massachusetts where, for the most part, our rights are being protected, which is not to say that I haven't been catcalled. It's not to say that I haven't been harassed. And it's not to say that I haven't been sexually assaulted because of my gender identity. And that's in a place that protects me and respects my gender identity. In places in the South, and even where I'm from, originally Long Island, New York, it is not safe to be a trans individual publicly right now. The county that I'm from currently has legislation prohibiting trans women who are in middle schools and high schools from being able to compete in any athletics whatsoever. And they are working their way on trying to get a county-specific trans bathroom ban passed, which would go directly against New York State's sanctuary laws for trans folks. But these county executives don't care. Bruce Blakeman, who's the Nassau County executive, is a longtime friend of Trump, and he's doing everything in his power to make the place I grew up as inhospitable to trans folks like myself as it can be, which is why I want to make sure that our judges are willing to use their full power to protect my rights to documentation, to protect my rights to access my medicine. Because without it, you will see a whole lot of trans folks dead, either through other people killing them or just not being able to survive in a society that has made them an enemy of the people.
I couldn't agree more. And I mean, that's why I tell, like, when I demand that people stand up for communities like yours, for vulnerable communities that are under attack by this administration, I'm not trying to appeal to people like, people that would attack the trans community are the same people that don't believe that, gay people should have rights or have the right to be married. And they're also the same people that don't believe that, Black people should be able to use the same bathroom as white people. There's a correlation from one period in America to the next, and these communities that have fallen under attack. I mean, in my mind and what I've come to understand is this the preservation of white cisgendered Christian male dominance in this country, and that's a real thing.
Yeah.
And people will fucking hear it come out of my mouth, and they'll fucking laugh at me, and MAGA will get up and troll my fucking comments, but it's a real thing. But fuck them, and fuck those people. What we need to have happen is that people that might feel the same way that I do, but are too busy going about their daily lives, concerned with other things, to stand up for these communities, to recognize it, and to carve out a portion of your day and dedicate it to fighting for democracy and protecting those that can't protect themselves. And so, that's why I thought it was incredibly important. Obviously, I wanted to platform you and give you an opportunity to talk about, your political run, which, by the way, how can people support your campaign?
I'm so glad you asked. Yeah.
Yeah.
The biggest way you can support me is to go to my website, jordanforgood.com. That's JordanForGood.com. All of my information about my platform is on there. All of my information about donating to my campaign, which is the single biggest operational need that I need right now. If you care about progressive politics winning in September and you want to see the rights of these marginalized communities being protected with these primaries come September, you can donate to my campaign. There's a big donate button listed on my website, and you can support me with however much money you have capacity to donate to. I'm running against a 41-year incumbent whose father was the longest serving Boston City Councilor in history. He has a lot of access to capital and power that I don't have. But what I have access to is the communities that I engage with. What I have access to are my neighbors. What I have access to are the interests and the needs of the people around me, because he doesn't canvass. He doesn't campaign. He hasn't responded to a single candidate forum or questionnaire in 25 years. He does not care about the interests of his voters or his constituency. He cares about staying in office because it is a status role to him. I care about the office because I want to actually use it to make a change and better the lives of my community members, better the lives of my neighbors, and ensure that we can use this post to steer Massachusetts away from mass incarceration and to actually make Massachusetts a bastion of hope, to ensure that we are emphasizing rehabilitation and we are emphasizing abolition and decarceral systems within our judicial system. Because I think if any state can do it, it's Massachusetts. But the biggest way that you can help me do that is to go to my website and donate to my campaign there.
Well, you certainly have my endorsement, Jordan, and who better to represent us than somebody who's from a community that's under attack by the system and by the administration. Final note, I just want to remind everybody that it's not just national elections that are important. It's not just, the president and voting for members of Congress. It's these down ballot races. It's local races. It's races that control, what judges are being appointed, that really are the most important. The Republican Party and the MAGA movement and Project 2025, that they recognize the importance of down ballot races long before progressive politics and progressive politicians at the national level did. And so we are now living in that reality. We need to change it, and we need to change it with people like Jordan Korgood. So again, Jordan, thank you so much for coming on. I hope we can have conversations down the line, especially after you've been elected.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much, Michael, for giving me the opportunity to chat a little bit about my campaign. I really appreciate it and respect you a lot for it. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Well, I just wanted to say that from my perspective, I think this is my favorite live that we've done. there's so many shows that can easily, like, we can get big names. We've had senators and congressmen, and these are the conversations that I feel like really matter the most. Just to give, people like that a platform, to give both guests today just really struck me and moved me. So I just wanted to put that out there. I don't know how you felt, Mike.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we found our lane in that, or at least, like, my interest is platforming people like Jordan, platforming, people who would be, for lack of a better term, political dark horses, but who are real, authentic human beings that I would want representing me if I lived in their locale. And so, that's what I'm looking to do. I'd also like to, stomp the shit out of MAGA at every opportunity that I can get. But I want to see people like that running for office, and I want to give them an opportunity, however small it might be, to come on this show and get their message out there, and be supported and feel supported from this community that we're building here, as we stand up for democracy and fight back.
Yeah, we want vulnerable communities to feel like they have a home here with us, that we are supporting the people who actually need support, not the folks who have a shit ton of it already and are probably going to be fine with or without us. We're here to help the people that really matter in this conversation, who don't get their voices heard often enough. So as a proud papa moment of this show today. So, all right. I think, so if you haven't followed or subscribed to the Michael Fanone Show, please do so. We'll be back next week, and keep this going consistently. And anything else to add, Mike?
Modelo time.
There we go. All right, everybody, thank you for being here.
Thank you guys for tuning in.
I want to take a second, because what we're talking about here, especially with candidates in the midterms coming up, is exactly why I don't rely on any single news source anymore. When elections ramp up, the information environment gets messy fast. Narratives get shaped, stories get emphasized or ignored, and depending on where you're getting your news, you can walk away with two completely different versions of reality. That's why I use Ground News. Ground News is an app and website that lets you compare how the same story is being covered across the political spectrum. You can see the political leanings of outlets, compare headlines side by side, and understand where coverage is being framed in a certain way or where something isn't being covered at all. One feature I use a lot is Blind Spot Feed. It shows you stories that are getting heavy coverage on one side of the political spectrum and barely any on the other, which is especially important during the election cycle. If you actually want to understand what's going on, not just what you're being shown, you need something like this. So go to groundnews.com/MFS and subscribe to their Vantage plan for 40% off. The link is the only way to get the discount.